to today's webinar, the SDL WorldServer Quarterly Showcase. My name is Kate Bradshaw and I will be your host. Your speaker today is Ray Hopley, Product Management Director for SDL WorldServer. We expect today's webinar will last about 30 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. I will now pass you over to Ray to begin today's presentation.
Great, thank you Kate, and welcome everybody to the first of the quarterly showcase sessions that we are having in 2018. There will be more to come, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but today's theme is all about managing quality, and with specific reference to SDL WorldServer and the interactions with SDL Trados Studio. So here's the agenda for today's session. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is translation quality, sometimes a controversial or contentious topic, but hopefully we can reach some consensus as we go through the material I'm going to present. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the results that we got from an SDL survey, this Translation Technology Insights. The key result there being, I've highlighted quality as king, but there's plenty more detail behind that. Then we're going to start looking at the tools, and specifically the QA Check auto action in WorldServer and the equivalent or a big brother version of that same feature in Trados Studio, which is the verification. And then quality models and TQA, so that's about translation scoring measures, and then talk a little bit about what we have planned for improvements in both tools going forward into this year and beyond. So what is quality? What is quality in the translation industry? It's very curious actually. I've taken a couple of sample quotes here. The definition of quality is usually presented as a problem statement. So you see things like the translation dilemma, speed, cost and quality. We have other examples. Measuring translation quality has long been a challenge for both ends of the supply chain, and a more extended version of that same thing. Translation quality is notoriously difficult to define and can be a source of debate and dispute. Again, all of these are not really definitions of quality, but they're more expressions of how difficult it can be to agree on a definition of quality, and that's really what the point of these things is. So we know it's hard to define, or according to those statements, which means it's impossible to measure with any degree of accuracy. This lack of objective measure causes friction in the supply chain, as was in those previous quotes. Those are from the Common Sense Advisory, and there's a little bit more on that to come. But as well as causing issues in the supply chain between translation vendor and translation buyer, the end result of publishing poor translation quality is customer confusion, brand damage, negative impact really on your globalization efforts, and this is at the end of the day why we're translating, is to reach global markets, and if we do that with negative connotations, then we've failed in that operation. The other curious thing about translation in quality in the translation industry is it's often seen as part of an iron triangle, and here is an example of it. I found just this diagram on the internet, quick Google image search, but there are plenty more. Is quality really so inflexible? Is it an iron triangle? Why is it made of iron? You can only have 2 out of the 3. You can only change 1 variable at a time. If you want high fast turnaround times, then you must pay more to guarantee the quality. If you want low cost, then you must allow more time if you want the quality. It seems a very rigid definition of quality and its dependence when managing translation projects. But this is really, an old-fashioned paradigm in my view, and there are many more modern approaches to project management. There's things like Agile. Now that's often considered software development methodology, but that feeds into other areas of business as well, and really Agile development doesn't really work unless the entire business is Agile, and business Agile means lean processing, better ways of working, better tooling as well, and obviously this webinar is really focused around how to measure and track quality using SDL tools. And so we'll look at some of the features in concrete detail a little bit further on, but surely with a combination of better practice, best practice workflows and better tooling, we should be able to break this rigid iron triangle and come up with a much better way of working. So in terms of ways of working, here are, again, from the in one of the early pages of one of their reports, as you can see there, from December 2015, not the most recent, but not too long ago. So this is really, I've re-summarized what those things are. You can read it more quickly. Holistic quality focuses on the overall impact of translated content. So this is a simple rating, but really the key here is it's published content. Once it's out in the field, your end users can say, yes, this article was helpful, yes, this translation was good enough for me. Analytic quality finds defects. This is really translation quality assessment. When you look at that bigger paragraph from the CSA, it's really about scoring. You start off with assumed perfect translation, and every time a reviewer finds an error, they categorize the error, they give it a score, and that number is ticked down until potentially it crosses a threshold of failure, and that particular piece of content is then sent for rework. So this is really the detailed kind of TQA, Translation Quality Assessment review. It's not just the regular review flow. And then the last one is automatic quality measures, formally recognized problems. So this is really about automated QA checks. This is a verification of things that you can tokenize, so that things that a machine can understand. This is placeholder tags, numbers, terms. You can use regular expressions. We'll look at some of the options that are available in both WorldServer and Studio later on. But really, this is my summarized interpretation of the 3 assessment methods that the CSA were defining in that report. But if you think about it, those things are really in reverse order, certainly from a chronological point of view of managing a translation project. Really, you want the reverse. You want translation supported by linguistic assets and automated real-time QA checks early in the workflow. Then, should you choose to go for this full in-depth TQA, Translation Quality Assessment review, with the scoring and correcting of translation errors and the capturing of that feedback, this is a very in-depth review phase. And then end-user feedback is really post-publication, and this is kind of ad hoc. The users aren't required to provide feedback on the quality of the translations that you publish. The first 2 are really steps in the workflow, and the last one is nice to have if you get it at all. Right, so this is really the opposite order of the way that they were presented in the CSA, and I see this then, if you reorder it this way, you start to get a process. And so we'll bring it down to earth a little bit more concretely. This is a WorldServer workflow. It's a very simple example. It's not really real world, but it shows you that we know now that with Translate, that step being supported by access to translation memories, to terminology and other reference material, plus supported by interactive QA checks within the translation environment, that is the first step. If you just go back here in the quality assessment and quality control and assurance, and then the second step could be linguistic review. It could be the more in-depth TQA type of review that was listed out by the CSA there. It doesn't really matter at this point. The point being here, we have the beginnings of a process that allows us to bake in quality into the translation project. And this is the famous 4I principle. So this is not the best translation, I don't think, of the German das Vier-Augen-Prinzip, which is really a standard methodology for guaranteeing quality in translation. If somebody translates it, somebody else has to review it. This isn't limited only to translation. Of course, in software development, again, we have standard practice, a code review. A developer works on a piece of code, and another developer reviews it and feeds back. Right? So this 4I principle is standard way of catching initial errors by a human. Okay, so that's really some kind of definition of quality. I know it's very high level at the moment. It's a very big topic, translation quality. That was really posing some of the questions about the difficulty, and we can see that just by posing those questions or attempting to answer them, you do come to a point where really process can help you guarantee quality. but there are other things that we can look at as well. So about the same time as that CSA report was being conducted, SDL was putting together a very deep survey, nearly 3,000 respondents right across the globe, the majority in EMEA, as you can see from this chart. Just to give you some context around who was answering, this is across the supply chain, so corporations, also language service providers and freelance translators fed into this. It is available still, the full report and the executive summary on the SDL website, but just some key highlights here for today's presentation. 3 in 5 people are not aware that there are even quality standards in the translation industry. And remember, these respondents are in the translation industry, and this is somewhat an alarming number. You look at the breakdown there. There wasn't an awareness or a familiarity with any particular metric. And as you can see, there are quite a number. I won't include ISO 9001 because that's a much bigger set of quality standards, but things like the LISA QA model, SAEJ 2450, TAUS DQF, MQM, all of these are fairly standard. The LISA QA model has been around for any number of years now. So it is somewhat surprising that people who are involved in translation industry are not familiar enough with quality. I think there is some more detail around why that. Well, let's look at this. So this is, again, we're back to the 3 arms of our triangle: quality, speed and cost, but they're not of equal length. So maybe it isn't the equilateral triangle that we saw in that simplistic diagram. In fact, quality is 2.5 times more important than speed and 6 times more important than cost. So this is some really interesting kind of graduation of that triangle, or those 3 variables really that feed into successful project management when it comes to translation. And so it's clearly quality is more important. Obviously, this is one of the things I do caveat here. This is the results of a survey where people can sit calmly and answer some nice questions that SDL has sent them and provide the feedback. I imagine that if you're in a real production scenario when the deadline is looming and there are issues burning, that some of these things might come up with variable answers, but we have to take the answers that we have. And I think it's fair to say 6 times more important is a significant factor of difference. We know that quality is the most important thing in translation, and yet from the previous slide, 3 out of 5 are not aware that there are standards. So, again, from this same report, we have some breakdown of what those surveyed users think the problems are with translation quality. Inconsistencies in use of terminology: almost half of the respondents said that this is a cause of rework, essentially. So this is the thing, when you don't bake quality into the execution of your project management, the cost goes up. So really, again, those variables are not dependent on each other in a simplistic manner. If you increase the quality, or you embed quality assurance into your processes, in fact, the cost could go down, is one of the implications there. But anyway, let's not jump too far ahead. Then we've got things like styling. So this is, does it match the corporate style guidelines, for example? All large corporations have them. Translation inconsistencies, so this is not quite the same as terminology inconsistencies. This is at a slightly higher level. So this would be things like you have 2 repetitions, they were translated by 2 different people, and you end up with 2 different translations. Both get published, and only at a later stage would you see that they are in fact inconsistent. You get these same inconsistencies also at the sub-segment level, where a phrase may be interpreted one way by one translator, it doesn't count as a fuzzy match from the TM, and so a different translator translates it a different way. Translation doesn't sound natural. Now there's an interesting one that stands out like a sore thumb to me, because that is really subjective, right? Sound to whom, right? There must be somebody's perceptions here feeding into that quality judgment. Then we've got concrete measures. So we've got 24% saying formatting problems, DTP problems, layout issues. That's the publishing end. So that's really, that's not linguistic issues. It may be as a result of the way that the translation has been written, so that it might be too long, for example, or if you found a shorter way of expressing it, then you wouldn't have that same DTP problem. But fundamentally, that's a different kind of issue. So those are really the top challenges as reported by that mix of corporations, LSPs, and freelance translators. Clearly, terminology is the biggest we have that we have identified. And so if you just cast your mind back to some of the statements earlier in the deck around translation quality, it turns out it's not that hard to define. You just need to ask enough people. And I think that's one of the great merits of that report. There's a lot of detailed analysis of the results, and but really, you know, if you ask 3,000 people in the industry and 50% of them almost say terminology is a problem, then I think terminology is something to focus. So these things can be measured objectively from the list that we just saw on the previous slide. There are some objective concrete measures. Terminology you can verify. You can verify inconsistencies, formatting, tagging errors, layout issues. All of those things can be quantified. Other aspects of quality are more subjective: style, fluency, and context. But you can still, as a reviewer, have a qualitative and quantitative response to what might be deemed a subjective error. Okay, so that's really kind of a reasonably long but high-level journey on to what is really quality, and it's about measuring and it's about catching deviations from full 100% quality translation before they get to the next phase in the workflow. So a translator needs to have some tools available to them, a reviewer needs to have a different set of tools potentially available to them, and then you can have multiple reviews. A client reviewer might not want to deal with the complexities of Studio's verification options, but they might want in-context rendering of the target text so that they can see and get that additional context so that they can make a value judgment about the accuracy of the translation. So there's plenty of different tools and supporting applications that we can use. I'm going to have a look at one now. So I've recorded some demos. So this is really about verification and Studio QA Check. I'm going to just run the video. What I'm showing here is the verification options that you get in Trados Studio. And there's a very rich set, so I'm going to select a few options, deviate from the defaults, segments to exclude. You get many options here. Here we go, inconsistencies, check for inconsistent translations. That was one of the important details that we saw called out as problematic currently. You can have some various options here. I'm going to check another option again here, punctuation. So here we see check for Spanish and French compliant spaces because they have some language specific rules. But I'll talk a little bit more about some of the areas we could improve this verification. But as you can see, there are already a rich set of options here and things that you could do to manage the capturing of deviations from quality. So we get into the real complex stuff now with regular expressions. This kind of stuff still frightens me when I look at it, but I know that it's very powerful for many of the power users who can configure those things, but some of the simpler ones are also there. The key piece here, though, is you can customize your settings and you can export those as we're doing now. And I'm going to overwrite the one that I'd already exported as part of the prep. And now we're going to switch to WorldServer, because in WorldServer we're able to take that Studio QA Check profile with all of those customized settings. You can upload it, as you can see me doing here, to the customization area, Studio QA Check profile. I already have 3. I'm going to add my newly created one. And once we have uploaded this, so this is really just uploading the file. The WorldServer application itself doesn't do anything with the definition of those settings. It merely allows them to be transported. And I'll go and show you how we do that now. So we have the verification settings. We then go into the project type setup screens, which is really about the definition of a project template. And here you will see that so there's quality models, that's different, we'll come to that in a moment, but the Studio QA Check profile, I now have what you saw there, those 4. I'm going to include the demo settings, just to show you that we can actually specify a different settings file per language, so per target language. So again, I'll come on to that when we get to the end. And so now I've associated a set of Studio verification settings that I define in Studio, exported, attached to a project type, and now I'm going to create a project. And obviously I'm going to specify that project type because when I come to download my Studio package, we will be injecting those settings into there. So time that a translator downloads a kit to open in Studio, we see that anything that's defined in the project type gets also included in that kit. So I'm just going to jump to the translation screen, and there's my project that's been created. And as I download the file and work in Studio, you'll see there all of the settings that I've customized are fully available to me. What's going on here really is the enterprise system managing the distribution of a consistent set of quality checks. You can vary them per language, you can vary them per project type, but the point being the governance of what those verification steps are is managed by the WorldServer. So I'm just going to let the demo finish, and you'll see once I've imported my package and I go to the project settings, you'll see that some of the non-default options that I checked, so if we look at it was in punctuation, you'll see that the option for check brackets was one that I checked, and that is available to you. So I'm passing those settings down through the supply chain. All of the translators, when they're working, will have a consistent set of checks. Those checks are executed real time per segment. So I've just confirmed a segment, and in the messages pane you'll see, because I only did a copy source to target for the purposes of the demo, it's telling me that the translation is identical to the source. So that's one of the many checks that are there. That's a very basic one. There's some obviously deep and rich options that I was showing you. Also, you can do it per project, so that not just segment by segment, but I can also execute the batch task. And for all of the files that are in the project that I'm working on, I will apply again those settings that were governed and passed down to me from WorldServer. And here's the batch report. And you can go also to the report screen itself and view those things. So again, it's really, this is about the enterprise governing the workflow and the definition of quality that's practiced during the translation phase. There is the report. Okay, just going to come back to the next. So the next video is really a very similar thing. But in WorldServer 11.3, we introduced, I'm just going to skip ahead, there's a little bit of delay here, we introduced a new auto action. So this is available out of the box. You can insert it into your workflow, and it covers some of the options that are available to you in Studio. So really the Studio verification framework is an extremely rich and set of quality assurance checks for the translator. It's really powerful as an interactive thing when they're confirming their segments, because they can then stop immediately and correct whatever issue might have been found. And here I'm just going to show you that in WorldServer we have taken a very small but important subset of that functionality and enabled in the workflow. The way that we consider the use case here is really a kind of belt and braces approach, so that the translator has their QA check verification settings governed by the project package, but upon return, for example, you can see quite a number of options here related to quality. So the untranslated segments, again, that's the same error I showed earlier. We also have the tag check. So if you remember from the report, terminology was the highest, but also tagging and inconsistencies were high. Changed numbers is a really important one, certainly for things like measurements and certainly medical dosages. You don't want to vary any of those numbers, so you can do that in an automated way. Terminology, there we are. So that's the key one, right? This auto action interacts both with native WorldServer term databases and also multi-term term bases associated with your WorldServer instance. So it will flag terminology errors as well. I'm just going to skip forward a little bit in this video because we're building the workflow. I'm assuming everybody knows how to do that. Really the important thing that we want to show you is that so there's a building the failure loop. So you have a success, goes back onto the regular flow to the reviewer, and then the failure at this point would go back to the translator for any potential read. So that's the workflow. I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. So here we are now translating a task. We're deliberately causing some of the failures, so we're going to not translate the first segment. We're going to skip the formatting tags in the second segment, and then we're going to reverse the order or modify the order of the tags in the third segment. In the fourth segment, we're going to shift the numbers around, and again this is going to cause a different kind of failure, and you'll see all of this very nicely captured in a report once the task has been submitted on to the next workflow. Just let that complete. And now you'll see that task, although it's completed, has come back, returned to the translate step in the workflow. If you remember, that means that something must have failed. And just to show you that out of the box, not only do you get the auto action, we also configure a task level attribute of attachment, and this is going to be the place where we store the QA check report. We have it in two formats: HTML for human viewing and XML for download and consumption in some other system. So here's a nice example of the report. You can see very simple, short task, only 4 segments, but we're highlighting each of the different kinds of errors. So we have untranslated segments, we have tags removed in this case, the tag order is different, and then the numbers have also changed in the last segment. So we only record one type of failure per segment in the report in order to stop it becoming too big. So here's the order of priority, so that's just a note for those of you come out of the video. Back here. Okay, so that is really about real-time verification, and as I said, there's kind of a belt and braces approach to that. You can't have enough quality gates in your process. Is something that you can probably derive from all of this important reports that have been put together around translation quality. But we see there that WorldServer is governing what happens in the supply chain in Trados Studio, but WorldServer is also executing a subset of those quality checks as well in order to have a double guarantee. Okay, so quality models, TQA. So quality models is the name of the feature, and TQA is really the activity, as it's called, described in Studio. So I have another video to show you, and this is really around TQA profiles. So TQA is really about quality model definition. This is about defining an error typology. This is the quality model that, if you remember from that SDL report, 3 out of 5 users within the overall supply chain are not familiar that these things exist, which is a shame. So here we are defining the error types, and for each type there are different kinds of severity. So starting with SDL Trados Studio 2017 SR1, so with that release, you are then able to define a quality model in WorldServer, you saw there, with the categories and the severities. And again, very similar to the way that we inject the QA profile into the package, we also inject the settings. There are some more restrictions. This is limited to workflow step of type review. As you can see there on the pop-up, so step type review. So this TQA is really a kind of in-depth review exercise on a task. Again, there's that project type setting screen, and the thing that I indicated earlier, we now are specifying a quality model, and this is that error typology. And again, we're going to create a project and download the package, and then you'll see we've already pre-created the project here, so we download package, and you'll see that again passed into Studio and automatically configured in TQA feature is the same options that you defined in WorldServer. Once again, this is an example of the power of centralizing your translation process management in an application like WorldServer, because that allows you to govern what goes on further down the supply chain in multiple aspects here we're talking about. So we're just going to open the archive, and you can see there's a new settings file here, TQA, and when that's opened in Studio, as you can see here, we're going to open the package, it's automatically configured. TQA, the quality model, really is about scoring the translation, in as much as it's about subtracting points from an assumed total per error type, per error severity. And then you can configure also certain thresholds, again I mentioned this earlier, that can be deemed the point of failure for a particular task. It's interesting that there should be even this concept of thresholds related to security. It means really that we've accepted that a document can be of sufficient quality for publication, even if it has some material errors within it. And you know, this is really a topic of but it's an interesting observation that, you know, all of this guaranteeing quality doesn't mean that the translation needs to be held to a higher standard of quality than the original source material. Here you can see, as I've been talking there, we're highlighting the different categories and severity levels, all of which correspond exactly to the quality. WorldServer. Okay, just quickly, I'll bring that up. We also have TQA in the new SDL Online Editor. You'll see here there's Assessment tab. This is the new online editor that we introduced with WorldServer in 11.2 back in summer last year. And with that first version, as well as some of the standard editing tools that you would expect, we also worked to deliver to this TQA reviewer use case. And again, the quality model that's defined is really what's feeding into this new UI that we're presenting here for allowing the capturing of those. Okay, so building on what we have quite a rich set of functionality in Studio Verification Framework. We have a very rich interaction now between the enterprise tool managing the different processes and therefore potentially different quality requirements across the different project types that can be configured. And we have some nice round tripping of things like TQA data, so that all of that information that you enter in Trados Studio is then returned in the return kit, is captured in the WorldServer application database, and is available there for reporting. What we don't currently have is a nice visual representation of that. That is in plan for an upcoming release this year. There's also a lot of work being done to improve the user experience for project managers and translators when working in Studio. And some of this relates to the verification user interface. And again, I've got another quick mock-up that I'm going to show you. So this is really to highlight the kind of work that we do with our user experience team. You'll see UX as an abbreviation. It stands for user experience. And we have a dedicated set of user experience individuals who, as you can see here, they do conduct research, they record interviews with 32 users, 3 different continents. These people are using QA checks all of the time. But here's the important lesson for SDL in all of this. 100% of them are also using other tools to supplement the work that they need to do. So this is an important lesson for us in terms of product improvement. We talk to our users, we really listen to our users, and we put together a lot of material, as you can see here. We understand where in the translation process this is important. Then we break down a number of the pieces of functionality. This is really documenting the issues. Okay, we know that we have a very rich and powerful set of functionality, but there is always room for improvement. And user feedback and comparison here, you can see to the competition, is really driving forward the product enhancements and innovation. So here's one piece of innovation coming in a later release of Studio, is the ability to have language pair specific verification options. You can kind of work around that in WorldServer now with that override in the project type settings. Here you can do this also in Studio. So here is an entirely new user interface. This is a mock-up, by the way. It's an interactive mock-up, and it's me showing some of the things that you can do. We've taken that, what is a very small window, the current verification report, and really beefed it up significantly. Now it occupies the entire screen. Real estate, it allows you to hide quite a number of the results. For example, if you're seeing that a particular QA check is causing a lot of false positives, with this new UI you'll be able to hide them. We're also presenting suggestions, as you can see here, so vocabulary suggestions from a term base. We'll also have a tag missing. The system is smart enough to make a good guess at where it belongs. And so this is really the future or the next generation of where we're going with quality verification summary review in SDL Trados Studio. So two things that we need to do better, and we will work on those this year, is really visualization of that translation quality assessment data, and also making that interactive display of the quality results in Studio a lot more powerful and a lot more flexible for our users. So that's the end of the demo. I've got my questions and answers slide up, so I know that there is a facility in BrightTalk for you to enter any questions. Kate, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Ray, for presenting. Yes, we do have a few questions that have come in, so I will begin from the top. If you do have any questions for Ray, now is a good time to ask, so get those into the chat box, but I will start from the top. The first one is actually about what are the plans you've got for this series, the quarterly showcase. Have you got any ideas on what future topics will be presented on going forward, or what can we expect from you for the rest of this year?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the quality topic is a very big one. I've barely scratched the surface in what I've been able to present in this half hour or so. So potentially we could look to do some more of that. Some of the topics would be, again, the detail of TQA, what kind of feedback is expected or from that particular piece of functionality. How much content should I send for TQA type review versus standard linguistic review? So this is really about sampling, data sampling. There's some best practices there that we could talk about. So on the quality theme, we could continue on and have a deeper dive. There are plenty of other areas of SDL WorldServer and other tools that we have that we could look to deliver. So I'm happy to take input from the field. But definitely quality, I think, deserves a little bit more attention.
Great, thank you. And Ray, you also have some details, I think, to share about how people can participate, ideas for future webinars.
Indeed, there is, so these will be run every quarter, as we mentioned, and in the links and attachments section, I think there are some links. One of them will take you to a forum where you can tell me and us what you would like us to present. You know, we can take votes on this or however it works out best, but I'm looking forward to getting any topics that you might be interested in hearing about. Obviously the topic is the discussion, as you've seen here. The kind of structure seems to be a natural one for me, is kind of define the topic a little bit, not with any reference to technology, but from the industry perspective, and then see how our technology solutions can deliver to some of those industry requirements. But again, if the users tell me they want to see a different format, then I'm more than happy to do that. We can do live demos too. I did record those videos just because this is a new presentation platform for me, and I didn't want to risk anything going wrong with it. But it seems to be working very well, so yeah, we can do live demos too.
Fantastic, Ray, thank you. One of the questions that have come in, will the new upgrades to the QA features be available in Studio and Group Share?
So what I've shown there with those mock-ups, that will be coming in a Studio release, not the next one, but the one after, and that's all I can say. We've got a very busy roadmap, as you are always aware, for SDL Trados Studio. particular area is managed by my friend and colleague Daniel Brockman. So the work that you saw there is beginning from a design and an analysis perspective, so it won't be in the next release but the subsequent one. Yes, that's a key area of focus, as you've seen.
Great, Ray, thank you. And another question we have for you. Is it possible to evaluate a random sample instead of 100% of the content?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I just touched on that around sampling. I have some interesting ideas there around how you can manage the sampling of content and how you can then channel a certain proportion of it to a regular review phase, as you should always have. There are cases, for example, if a particular translation or file for translation is 100% context ice match, then it can even skip review, right? So what are the criteria for it to either go to a regular review or be routed to a more in-depth TQA review? Because you don't want to do that on every single project, as the questioner, I think, is leaning towards, because it is an onerous task. It does actually add to the cost and the time, those two other variables. So, the famous iron triangle, which I don't like by now, if you increase the review cycle to the point of doing a TQA type review, you've increased the quality by definition, but you've also increased the time and the cost, right? And that's prohibitive on 100% of projects. So yeah, there are some smart ideas that we're bouncing around here in the product management group, SDL. I think maybe as a follow-up, the next quarterly showcase, we can talk about some of those. Their ideas currently, they're at this kind of a design and analysis phase, so there's nothing in immediate release, but certainly we intend to do something along those lines this year in 2018.
Great, thanks, Ray. Another question here for you, quite an interesting one actually. Were there any results from SDL's Insight report that particularly surprised you? Quite an in-depth and detailed report actually.
It is a very in-depth and detailed report. I mean, some of the fact that 3 out of 5, so 60% of the respondents, again, from across the globe, across all the different players in our industry, were not aware that quality models existed. I mean, I've known that quality models have existed for quite some time, but then I've been a product manager for our enterprise tools for quite a number of years. But I do know that from talking to my customers that it's an area of interest, because people, obviously, we want to maximize the quality of the published content that we have, but it does add that extra work. So, but the fact that people weren't even if you didn't use it, the fact that people weren't even aware of it did surprise me greatly, actually. That report, like I said, is still available on the SDL.com website. You'll have to put in your name and email address, and you can download it. I would recommend it. Perhaps we could post a link to that in the forum. I think that would be a good thing. Just refresh people's memories. Like I said, the results are about a year old now. That doesn't invalidate them by any means. We have not solved all of the problems that have been thrown up by the results of that survey, but yeah, definitely an interesting read, taking the pulse of our industry.
Thank you, Ray. Yes, we'll certainly share a link to that report, I think, after the webinar in the forum, and details on that forum where you can share your ideas and any topics you might want for future webinars. Like I say, we'll make that available in the recording as well. So I think, given that we're approaching 1:45, we can close the webinar today. So thank you very much for attending, and we hope you found today's session useful, and we look forward to seeing you again on one of our future webinars. So have a great rest of the day, and thank you from me.
Thank you very much.